Hello everybody, in this video we're going to create a subtraction quiz. So what this video is going to do, we're going to create a program that obtains two random numbers, and then we're going to ask the user to calculate this number 1 minus number 2. So we're going to ask the user to calculate the difference between two numbers. We're going to swap the numbers so that number 1 is always greater than or equal to number 2, and the reason we're going to do that is so we don't get any negative answers. And we're going to use if-else statements to tell the user if they were correct. So let's head over into Eclipse. I've created a new project called Subtraction Quiz, and right away we're going to add a new class to this. And the class is going to be called Subtraction Quiz. 1Z. And yes, Eclipse, make me a main method. Alright, so I'm going to maximize this. Now again, we're going to be obtaining user input. So we got from the keyboard. So we're going to import scanner, java.util.scanner, and down the main method, the first thing we're going to do is obtain two random numbers. So int number 1 equals. Now what we're going to do here, this is kind of important. We can use a method called math.random. Okay, and this returns a double, so it's a floating point number, it's a double data type, and it returns a number between 0 and 1.0. So what we need to do here, getting the user to do the subtraction of a floating point number between 0 and 1 that has a lot of decimal places, not very fun. So what we're going to do is multiply this by 10. Now, this now means it's a number between 0 and 9 with a whole bunch of decimal places. And then we're going to typecast the whole thing to an integer that we assign to number 1. So we're getting a number between 0 and 1, multiplying it by 10 to get a number between 0 and 9, and then typecasting that to an int that we store as a variable. And we're going to do the exact same thing for number 2. So I'm just going to copy paste this code and change the name of the variable to number 2. Alright, so unlike in the previous video where we used the system time to generate our numbers, here we're actually using a random number generator. Alright, so the next step is we don't want to deal with any negative answers. So we're going to swap number 1 and 2 around if number 2 is greater than number 1. So the way we're going to do that is with an if statement. Now, up until now, all of our code has been executed in a linear fashion. We just have one line of code after the next, until we got to the end of our program. That's fine for really simple things, but most of the time when we're writing programs, we need them to make decisions. And the way we can do that, well, one way we can do that is with an if statement. And if we're going to draw this like a flowchart, it looks like this. We have our linear execution of code, and then we come to an if statement. Now, inside here is a Boolean expression. So, an expression that evaluates to either true or false. Now, if the expression evaluated to true, we do this block of code. Otherwise, we skip over and join up here. And then our program continues executing linearly. So if the Boolean operation is true, we execute this block of code. If it was false, we skip it until we get to the end of the block, and then we continue executing. So that's what an if statement looks like. So back over into Eclipse now. We can swap the numbers if we need to. So if number 1 is less than number 2, swap them. And the way we do an if statement in Java is simply with the keyword if, and then parentheses, and inside the parentheses goes our Boolean equation. So if number 1 is less than number 2, then we have a block of code here. And we're going to swap these two numbers around. Now to swap them, remember we want to end up with this actually being assigned to number 1, and number 1 being assigned to number 2. To do this, we need to have a temporary variable to store one of them while we do the swap. So int temp equals number 1. So temp has been assigned the same value as number 1 has. Now we can change the value of number 1. So number 1 equals number 2. Assign number 1 the value of whatever's in number 2. And now we can put number 2 back to temp. And we've swapped the values around if we need to. So now the user never has to enter a negative number for the answer. So the next thing we're going to do is tell the user what they need to do and then obtain their answer from them. So prompt the student to answer is number 1 minus number 2. Alright, so system.out.println. What is, now we're going to end our string literal, number 1 plus, okay, so string concatenation minus plus number 2 question mark. Oh, actually, we don't want this to be a print line statement. We want it to be a print, so it stays on the same line. All right, so, oh, we forgot to create our scanner. That's okay, let's do it now. Scanner input equals new scanner, and like before, system.in, because we're reading from the keyboard. All right, so next is going to be their answer. So another variable called answer equals input.next int. So we've obtained their answer. Now what we're going to do here is if they got the answer correct, we're just going to say, you are correct. If they got the answer wrong, we're going to say that they're wrong, but also tell them what the correct answer was. So we're going to have another if statement, but we're going to build on it a little bit more. So in this example, we had, if it's true, we executed a block of code. If it's false, we just skip that block of code and go until, and then we join up after it. What we're going to do here is have our if statement with a Boolean expression. If it's true, we're going to execute this block of code. If it's false, we're going to execute this block of code. And then after the blocks of code, they join up at the end and we continue executing. So if it's true, then we do one block of code. Otherwise, if it's false, we do another block of code. So it's kind of an extension onto the if statement we just did before. So how we do that? Well, we have an if statement with our Boolean expression, and it's going to be if number 1 minus number 2 is equal to their answer. So in other words, if our calculated answer is equal to what they entered, then we are going to simply system.out.println you are correct. Now, how do we do this otherwise bit? Well, it's in Java, it's with the keyword else. So what this means is, if this is true, do this block of code, else or otherwise do this block of code. And what we're going to put in here is system.out.println your answer is wrong. And then we're going to put in a new line, so escape sequence for a new line, plus number 1 plus minus string with a minus in it. I might just jump down to the next line to spread things out a bit, plus number 2 plus should be. So we've told them that their answer is wrong. Now what we're going to say is what the correct answer is. So a plus sign and then parentheses number 1 minus number 2. Now, the reason we need the parentheses here is so that this gets executed first. If we didn't have this, we'd end up with string concatenation. So we might not, but we put the parentheses in to force this, the precedence, so we know what's going to happen. So as we're going to calculate number 1 minus number 2, and then concatenate the answer onto our string. So let's save this and try running it. So I'm just going to get our UI back, run as Java application. All right, so what is 4 minus 3? Well, let's type in the correct answer, 1. You are correct. Awesome. Now let's run this again. What is 8 minus 4? Now, just so you know I'm not messing with you, I know the answer's 4, but let's put in 2. Your answer is wrong. 8 minus 4 should be 4. So you can see here that because we got the answer wrong, This block of code never executed, but this one did. So that's the if-else in action. And if we ran this a whole bunch of times, we'd never see number 1 being less than number 4 because we swapped them if we needed to. So that's it, really, for this program. So what do we do? Well, in this video, we used math.random to actually obtain random numbers from the system. So it uses a random number generator. Now, it returns a double between 0 and 1.0, so we needed to multiply that by 10 to get a number between 0 and 9, and then typecast it to an int, so we lost the decimal places. We use an if block to conditionally execute code. The block's only executed if the Boolean expression is true. And we can use an else block to execute an alternative block of code. So if the condition for the if block is false, then we execute this block of code instead. So that's it for this video. Thanks a lot.